All right. As Connie said to you, Cliff Notes don't even quite say it. The chakras are something that you just keep learning about and, hearing about. And it's like anything really in life, certainly, but even on our spiritual path, I would say particularly, which is why I said it's a shame that some of the people who've been around a long time don't come to some of these classes, because wherever we are spiritually, we hear with those ears. And hopefully for all of us, it's different. We hope that we grow so that if we heard the same talk even next week, we would be able to garner a different experience from it. And that is the way it is with the chakras. I remember one of my friends who's been with Ananda for a long time, the first time I was ever going to teach a chakra class, which was a long time ago, she just started giggling. Good thing I didn't know why she was laughing. I mean, the chakras are absolutely at the very core, literally, they're at the core of the spiritual path. There's nothing you can do on the spiritual path that doesn't involve the chakras. In fact, even if you don't know you're on a spiritual path, there's nothing you can do that doesn't involve the chakras. So there's that. But still, so it's perfect in a way that you get to hear a couple of hours, and then every class will talk a little bit about it. Next month we're doing those 8 manifestations of divine energy, 4 classes, 2 topics each night, where we talk about what would pure divine energy look like. What does it look like when it's light, when it's sound, when it's peace, when it's calmness, when it's joy, and on and on. And there will be many different speakers in that class, but we'll all have to be talking about the chakras. You can't talk about love and not mention the heart chakra. So the more times you come, the more you keep hearing things, and it's just an experience of building blocks, but that's what we're all doing all the time in life. So always on Wednesday, yeah, and I'll talk more about it next week, but we just keep going with these Wednesday night series. So, because it's a nice habit to get into. That's what I told those of you who took Raja Yoga when I came the last class. It's you put aside at least one night of the week, for many of you I know it's more, where you're just engaged in satsang. And it's a wonderful thing to do. As Connie was saying, and I'm going to say it, the whole goal of the spiritual path, the entire goal of the spiritual path, is to move the focus of our energy from the medulla to the spiritual eye. Now we say from the medulla because, and I think I said this the first week, but I'm going to repeat it because it's important to pick up a flow here. When the ovum and the sperm unite, the very first cells of the body that are formed are the medulla. And from there, sends out a lot of our nervous system develops, and then other parts of our body develop. But the minute that the sperm and ovum unite, and there's that flash of light that goes out, and some soul, and there's a lot that I've heard about this, I can't say I know it from experience, but the souls who are drawn to be born into that family, really why? Because of exactly what's going on in their chakras. It's exactly their karma, and they're magnetized, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, to certain places that come in the world. And it's not just one place for one soul. There's often a lot of souls that would like to come in, but one gets in. Sometimes, as we know, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 get in, but usually one does. And the instant that happens, we become, we have an ego. Master says the ego is the soul identified with the body. So immediately, literally, immediately there is ego consciousness, not any longer soul consciousness. And it's really doesn't seem right, does it, that the whole journey after that has to try to get back where you were anyway. But hopefully we're making a little progress. Now, just parenthetically, I'm going to say that I got into that topic. It's right where I want to be, but I wanted to finish a thought before, which may not come to me right now, when I was saying about classes and why to take them and what they do. Anytime you're here, anytime you're in good spiritual company, anytime you're chanting, anytime you're listening to these talks, you're helping yourself move on that journey, that whole journey to get from here to here. So it is a wonderful thing to do for that reason. Now, there is that, I don't know what the right word is. Let me think. I want to say that piece of the soul, that piece of infinite consciousness that becomes you, that stays throughout your entire incarnations at a soul level is called a jiva. So that's the soul part of it. So that jiva can be in this body, it'll be in a different body next life, and many different bodies as it goes. But that soul, that soul part remains you, and it carries a lot of characteristics of you from one life to another. So even though we take on different bodies, were we able to remember life to life, or was Connie able to remember who we were in our last life together, because we know we've had many lives together, she would say right away, oh yeah, I recognize you. I mean, Brian said tonight, when we were over there, Connie was asking him if he knew me, and Brian and I have probably talked twice before this at Sunday services, but we both had that feeling that we've all had many times. And he said, oh, I just feel like I've known Shanti forever. And I said, well, we probably have. Probably more lifetimes than we'd like to remember, but you just can feel it. There's something familiar. We recognize it in each other. And every once in a while we have those deja vu, or every once in a while I'll almost feel like I'm a caricature of myself to myself. It's like I'm getting too good of a view, but it's not that logical. And I think it's just a memory that comes through, so that we start realizing that it's the same consciousness moving on, but again, hopefully, not just expanding and evolving, but really doing just what Connie was talking about. Every single thing that we do has an effect on these chakras, these energy centers. They literally are, as she showed you beautiful pictures. I don't have to go through all of that, but they're real. You see, just because we can't see them makes them no less real, which we've talked a lot about before. And it's very hard. This is a very hard piece of work that we have to do to expand our consciousness and imagine that the physical realities that we see are the most contracted part of our consciousness. We think these bodies are great. And, we think, I tease, but I'm not teasing, just because I spent so many years at Stanford with the great minds. I heard this thing today, just actually driving back over here from the farm, that they've done a study and they've ranked all the universities in the world. And so everybody was real proud because California took second and third place. Of the best universities, Stanford was second and UC Berkeley was third, which is interesting. Of course, Harvard was first, the ongoing battle. But, because I spent so many years at Stanford, where there are a lot of great minds, and it's very easy to start thinking, and it's true. I don't want to try and negate it. It's great to have a great mind, but even the greatest of minds is so contracted compared to our potential. And so I've been saying in these classes, our whole goal is to get out of our minds, literally, to lose our minds. That's what we want to do. But, as Connie also alluded to before, you can't hold those thoughts. Very often you say these words, remember that you're one with God, go beyond mind, all these things. They don't mean anything to anybody until you've had an experience of it. They're just words. What does that mean, one with God? From a logical point of view, it just can't make any sense. You can't make it make sense in your mind. The instant you have an experience of it, nobody's ever going to talk you out of it. But they're not things that we can necessarily logically talk somebody into. It's a very interesting thing about the spiritual path. I just have always prayed, as I've been teaching for all these years through Ananda, let it just be magnetic enough. Let the masters be speaking through me enough that even if people want to go, what is she talking about? The curiosity just draws them in because there's something they're sensing. even though I always know the words don't do it. That's not what it is. But we have to use those words. We have to communicate that way, so that's where we are. The whole reason we're here is to take this journey that we're taking. And, like this, just like the Kundalini, just like you saw the pictures. Connie made a statement when she started talking that she said, we are infinite energy, and we are, but we really have to hold on to the fact that we are manifested from that energy. We actually are born of that energy, and it matters when we're trying to understand the chakras. The chakras are, they are a spiritual blueprint for us that lasts life after life after life with adjustments each time. The blueprint changes. It's sort of like the chakras are the physiology of our spiritual life. That really is what they are for us. We cannot have a thought, an action, anything happen to us, certainly anything we put out in the world, nothing can happen that isn't being determined by the energy as it flows through our chakras and isn't at the same time affecting our chakras. It's virtually impossible because it's all energy and it's all connected. It's only disconnected in our minds right now from what we're talking about, but as soon as we can transcend mind, any single thing that we do, that's why it's so important that we come here Wednesday nights. That's why it's so important that we listen to right music. And it doesn't matter for a minute what we would like to be, what we wish we were. Gee, I'd really wish I didn't know so much fear, or I so don't want to be somebody who judges people. But the reality of my spiritual life is the reality. Am I afraid? Am I judging people? So the truth about what's going on is the truth. There's that saying in the Bible, God is not mocked. And really, this is what it means. It means we have to get self-honesty is so meaningful on the spiritual path, to just be willing and able to look and see where you are so that you can take your very own next step. Because, we hear all the time about how fingerprints, there's no two fingerprints that are alike. There are no two sets of chakras that are alike. You can't live anybody else's reality, and nobody can live yours. This is the incredible fallacy of the way most of us live whenever we think that we know how things should be for anybody else. We're all living in a certain amount of delusion. We're all living in this duality, some degree of separateness. What difference does it make if somebody else's delusion is different than yours? It really doesn't matter. So we can only help to be there as an energetic force to allow people to grow, provide a safe place, be as unconditionally loving as we can, bear witness, which is so powerful. There are many ways that we can help people, but we can never help anybody by thinking we know exactly what their path should look like, because we have no idea. We can say that it's good for anybody. It's always good to be in good spiritual company. It's always good to listen to inspired music, because any single thing that we do that has an upward energy, anything, is good for us. And it doesn't matter how far it takes us. We can be sure, again, because remember, it's energy, it's magnetic. So it's pulling this energy in. We keep saying up, and it's because we're sort of standing on 2 feet. I want to be very clear. There's nothing so linear here. It's not like you stand still, you get your first chakra completely balanced, flowing, in order, whatever word you want to use. There aren't really any words. And then, when your whole first chakra is set, then you go to work on your second chakra. It's not like that. It's virtually impossible. What is true is that you cannot be a completely balanced, centered, uplifted person if your first chakra is imbalanced. And we'll talk a little bit about it. Connie started to mention it, but we'll go through how might you know? Because if you get to know the chakras well enough, you know, it's just like practicing medicine for years. I can walk into a room full of people and just in a heartbeat have an idea of certain medical things that are going on with people. Usually I don't say anything, but every once in a while I have to say to somebody, have you had your thyroid checked? Or did you know that you have, you know, this mold that should be looked at? Or, I mean, it happens in so many ways. It's a sixth sense that you get when you've been doing it for a while. Same thing's true with the chakras. You start getting to know them, you start getting to understand the language of the chakras, and you pay attention to yourself, you can actually almost read them. And you begin to know, you know, what is that system of understanding who and how people are that goes by numbers? Oh, I'm a 3, I'm a 6. The Enneagram, right. And people walk around telling you what numbers they are. And actually, I've had people tell me what I am, and pretty much they're right. It sounds right to me when they say it. I don't study it. But it's like that. I mean, because these systems that are devised around energy, if you get quiet enough and still enough and honest enough, then you can begin to know. And it matters a lot because we know that we can influence the chakras. And it almost doesn't matter when we're thinking about these to figure out what's wrong. That's not always very helpful. On the spiritual path, it's often specifically not helpful. What is helpful is just to start behaving in dharmic ways, doing what's right, doing what's good. No sense in trying to figure out what's wrong. Because you'll get one thing figured out, maybe. Doesn't even mean you can change it. Probably everybody's had this experience. I know I've had it, unfortunately, over and over, where you have a personality thing, whatever it is. Again, maybe it's a fear of something, or maybe you feel rejected easily, or who knows. And you really work on it, and you absolutely are sure that's not there for me anymore, that's not going to bother me. Then you have an experience in life, and I've said to myself, oh my God, where did that come from? I was so sure I was healed in that way. Very, very hard to heal one aspect of ourselves after another, after another, after another. It already takes us millions of lifetimes. It would be that many more lifetimes. What is much easier is for us to put the magnet in the right place, to just start moving energy, doing things that move energy, and then do what we can to direct that energy in a positive way. Because, you know, in each chakra, it's like a lotus. That's why they're called lotuses. And as they, you know, there's no quite great English word for it, but as they're balanced, as they're opened so that energy can flow, it's just like this, and energy really can flow. So who cares what was wrong there for the last 10 lifetimes? What difference does it make? What matters a lot is the direction that we're moving in and how much energy and willpower we bring to it. If you imagine a river, which is a lot of how we liken the sushumna and the chakras, we talk about these little currents on the side of a river. You know, and water gets over here and it gets stuck in twigs and rocks and just spins around and around, and you can watch it sometimes. A bug will get stuck in there or something. Well, if you opened a dam at the top of the river and you let energy flow, a lot of energy, in this case in the form of water, it draws those things in that were stuck on the side. They can be stuck there for a long time, but it draws it in and it moves it. And that's the same way we are. If we start applying a lot of energy to moving in the right direction, it doesn't mean I will do this, I will do that. It doesn't mean with that kind of energy. It means this. It means showing up at classes. It means coming to church on Sundays. It means more and more associating with like-spirited people. You know, it means, as Yogananda said, smile, you know, lift your face up in the mirror. All these things that say yes. You know, I have very little art in my home that doesn't have to do with the spiritual path. I can appreciate art, but I'm actually really not interested. I'm not that interested in having too many things in my house anyway. But mostly I want them to be pictures of the masters or a picture that Joe Tisch painted. But I have two things in the house that have nothing to do in that way. One is a wooden figure of a woman with wild hair like mine used to be. I mean, a real afro, and she's just there like this, and she's painted so beautifully. And every time I look at her, I feel like, yes, that's perfect. It makes me feel that way. So I've let her stay with me. And another piece that just does the same thing for me, but it's a good energy, even though it's not, quote unquote, spiritual art, because that's what I want to keep feeling. That's where I want to keep moving. What makes us spiritual is not necessarily where our life is right now. It's not necessarily how much we think we have together. What makes us spiritual is the direction we're heading in, how we choose to solve our problems. Do we see problems as obstacles and get stuck? Or as Master said, do we see more and more everything as an opportunity for spiritual growth? Because this is the truth. Everything that happens in life is an opportunity for great spiritual growth. From the most simple things to the most horrendous things. What matters is how we choose to use it. We had a meeting a couple weeks ago at my house, and I said to somebody, we were having not this discussion, but a similar, I said, what's that term that they say in fights, when there's a fight, in the ring, a real professional fight, whatever that means. Sounds like an oxymoron to me, a professional fight, but anyway, they have them, I guess. And you say break clean? You say break clean or something? The referee? Oh, it's wonderful. Nobody in here even knows, but there's a term. I love that. Yay! I think it's called break clean, and when the referee says that, you just have to get off the guy that you're choking to death or whatever they look like that's what they're doing. And somebody in the meeting said, yes, you're right. Our new term ought to be break yes. It was so nice. It's like, where do you fall when you have a hard decision to make, when something's really rough is going on? This is really what tells us about where we are in our spiritual path. It doesn't matter what's happening. The thing of it doesn't matter at all. We have no idea what the real meaning of most of the things that are going on in our lives are. We try and guess, and we think, oh, maybe I'm going through this because of this or that. But really, we almost never get it right. And usually, by a year or 5 or 10 down the road, we look back and we see, wow, if that hadn't happened, this wouldn't have happened, this, that. And, it's just so interesting how that happens. Larry.
I heard this story. A friend of mine went to the doctor, and she got diagnosed with some pretty challenging medical condition. And so when she came back, her friends asked her, what it was, what she had. And she said it was an AFGO, an AFGO, another freaking growth opportunity.
Another freaking growth opportunity. I love that. That's perfect. That's really what it is. And that's what defines us more than anything. It doesn't matter whether we particularly, in terms of the outside world, win or lose in any particular moment. What really matters is our attitude. The spiritual path has so much to do, it really all boils down to attitude. But it's direction, it's our intention, and it is right attitude. It means literally breaking yes. And at the end, you're going to come up and say, yes, okay, I will. What do I do? We don't sit there and feel victimized or, why did this have to happen to me? We're really moving in the right direction when we can say, why is this happening to me? And it's easier in some moments than in others, no matter where we are on this path. The very fact that we're still in these bodies says we're not getting it right 100% of the time. But really, who cares in a way? I want to just review for us what happens after that moment when the ovum and the egg meet from there, because prior to that, we were living in some, I don't know if ethereal means the same as ether, but it almost sounds like it. I don't think really that they actually mean the same place, but in some expansive space when we're taking on a new life. We go from this state of ether, of living more with space. And Master said an interesting thing about this. He said, the way we think of space in this country he was talking about is as if nothing is there. But he really wanted to make it clear, space is energy. It's just energy that we can't exactly see in the same way or feel, so we think of it as being nothing. But it's important, of course, because we're coming from that energy. And just like Connie was talking, mostly she spoke about this ascending route of the chakras. But what happens when we're born is we first have to go from ether to air to fire to liquid to solid, to matter. That's what happens. And then when we're in that place of matter, a physical world, this becomes our reality. This is what we think is actually what reality is everything that we see. So most of us have been walking around like that. Now, once we start moving through these chakras, we just have to turn the trip around. We just literally have to make a U-turn and come back up. Well, we have to do it in a way that we're trying consciously to be, that we're being conscious, that we're on the positive, which means expansive, which means growth-producing side of the chakra. So, as she said, the first chakra, which is about groundedness, it's about steadfastness, it's about saying, I know where I am in the world, I know what's important to me. Master said that one of the most important qualities on the spiritual path is loyalty. This is where we develop a sense of loyalty. It's not easy. You know, every week people come to me or write to me, every week. I mean, of course, I'm a little out there. I mean, I'm easily accessible. But people tell me, you have to watch this video. You're going to love this video. As somebody came up to me last week, oh, I just went to hear Adya Shanti. You've got to go with me, Shanti. I really think you'll love him. And I feel like, I'm sure I would love him. He's speaking the truth. I know that. But I don't want to go anywhere else. Why would I go anywhere else? I'm not going to hear anything else. They're my vibrations here. So it's not that people have to do that before they're ready. But when you watch people who for 20, 30, 40 years, trying this path, trying that path, trying this path, they're not solid. They're not steadfast. They haven't yet developed that loyalty. This is just to a spiritual path. But we're talking about these qualities throughout all of life. Do we know what we want to do? Can we stick to things? Are we loyal with our friends, with our family? And loyalty doesn't always mean that you stand still even for the worst of it. That's the point. None of this means, the words don't mean what we think they mean in the world. We're talking about spiritual qualities now. And as Connie kept saying, we're talking about these qualities that are then directed towards spiritual growth, towards attunement. Yeah, Marilla.
Question. Could you elaborate a little bit more how the masters are located towards the certain chakras? For example, I heard that the root chakra is located, is associated, sorry, not located, is associated with Sri Yukteswar.
Yukteswar?
Sorry, my pronunciation not very good at the moment. And the third chakra is associated to our master.
Well, you know, I probably can't, I'm probably not able to answer that. I've never even heard that about Sri Yukteswar. But I will say to you about Master, that's very interesting, is that Master, there's a big question about whether Master was Arjuna. And Arjuna in the Gita really represents, you know, each of the Pandava brothers in the Bhagavad Gita represents one of these first 5 chakras. And it's essential to the telling of that story. That's not where I want to go tonight because that's a whole other 8-week class or lifelong class really on the Gita. But it does matter, and it really matters when we're talking about it here with Arjuna. And so I didn't know, I've never heard specifically that Master was, but I know that Master was Arjuna, and Arjuna was the 3rd chakra, and it was so important because I just jump ahead of myself. It's fine because we're talking about it. The third chakra represents as fire. That's the element. And fire, as you know, we call it purifying, but it literally burns things up so that they transform their form. They go from solid to air very often, or to another form. It's a very, very meaningful moment in our spiritual development as we are feeling ourselves work through third chakra issues, because it's the time where we're moving further away from, in an obvious form, this physical reality. Otherwise, we're talking about earth, then we're talking about water. Now we're talking about spiritual qualities about them, of course. We're talking about groundedness, earth, matter, solidity. That's what we're talking about. When we talk about water, we're talking about water can change form in a way that earth cannot. So it's always a progression. We're moving in a positive direction. But when you get to fire, and fire burns things up, you can't even tell what form it was before. So it's an essential step on our spiritual development. And I know many of you have heard this. I think I even spoke briefly about it in this class a week or two ago. But at that point in the Bhagavad Gita, where Arjuna looks at Krishna and says, I don't want to kill my cousins, because that's the battle. The battle is really taking place in our spine, in these chakras. The whole Gita that's happening, we're reading the story about out there, but the allegory means it's happening in our spine. We're moving and we are purifying and we're literally changing form. We have to allow ourselves to let go of those qualities that are holding us too firmly in this physical body, in this physical reality. We've got to transform, or spiritually we're dead. We cannot move spiritually. So Krishna looks at Arjuna, who's the third chakra, where things need to become purified, and that representation of the third chakra is saying to God, I don't want to do this. I don't want to kill these people. Meaning, I don't really want to have to let go of all that. Can't I just let go of a little and hold on to the rest? I mean, okay, I'll come to church every Sunday, and I might even come to Kirtan on Friday night, but wait a minute, are you telling me that I can't really be attached to my gorgeous car and all my shoes? How much do I have to let go of? And Krishna's basically saying to Arjuna, your life depends on it. And he says, not only does your life depend on it, but because Arjuna represents all of us, he's called disciple every man. And remember, this is third chakra. Krishna says to him, everybody's life depends on your doing this. Because Arjuna had thrown down his bow and said, I won't kill. And Krishna said, if you do that, nothing can live, meaning nothing can grow. Nobody can evolve. You've got to take care of this because he's us. So God was just speaking to every one of us and saying, if you don't have the courage to move through this purification, you're dead. You're just not going to make any spiritual progress, which is, of course, the whole point of life, and it was the whole point of Krishna's teaching. So, and Master, if you look at Master, as many of you heard me say last Sunday in church, this is quite a path that we've come onto. That man accomplished more in a lifetime than, most of us could hope to accomplish in thousands of lifetimes. And interestingly, he came out of a lineage where there was not that kind of activity. Babaji's sort of hanging out in the caves in the Himalaya, and, Sri Yukteswar had a very small group of disciples. He was hard. He was a hard guru to have, hard to be with. And interestingly, through that lineage, and even if you look at Lahiri's life, he was an accountant, he had a family, but he was living a very quiet, much smaller life. And Master comes along, and he was literally born to come here to do the work he did. As Swamiji said, You know, he was born to come and change the consciousness of everyone in the West. To change the consciousness of everyone in the West. That's quite a job. You know, so, I mean, he wasn't hanging out or sitting still, so he had a lot of fire. And it's interesting that you bring it up, because when you look at people and you say you can read chakras or know something about them, he had to. Many of the people who were closest to him said they didn't think he ever slept. You know, or they would think he was asleep and they'd say something and he'd answer them. I mean, many times. There's a lot of funny stories about that, but I don't know about the other masters representing the chakras. That it may well be true. I've just never read about it or heard about it. Does anybody else have any other questions or comments before I'm going to go back down to the first chakra again, but does anybody want to make a comment or ask anything? No? Let me just get over there. I want to... this is what happens when you speak second. You sort of have to adjust where you go based on where whoever spoke first went. So anyway, I'm going to go back into the first chakra now just for a minute, but to talk about what are some of the negative aspects. Again, when we say negative, you know, again, it has the wrong connotation because it's the English language, but we who are yogis and trying to grow, we're asking ourselves, how can we know if what are all the signals that we're getting back when we're on the path? You know, if you feel, as Master said, clear about where you want to go, calmly active and actively calm, that sounds like, I mean, of course it came from Master, so it's the truth, but when you hear it, you can even hear, it just sounds like somebody who's solid, who knows what they want, who knows where they're going, and who can, now calmness comes in, of course, as a quality of a chakra, just like that, up more at the fifth chakra, but it doesn't matter. As I said, these are not linear. They don't just build on each other, they build with each other. There's no such thing as really linear. You can't be linear when you're an energetic reality. But again, our language makes it seem that way. But if you get really too fixed on an idea and you can't let go of it, and you become, you know, we think of being tyrannical as having a lot more to do with the third chakra, but if you become so fixed, really fixed in a place, and you inflexible, you just don't want to budge at all, then you might be a little too, that might be based more on insecurity than it doesn't sound like a strength in a chakra. I mean, you can even hear it when you meet somebody like that. They're so fixed in their ways. They're never open to new ideas. They are too afraid to move from what they know. That's not really using the energy of the chakra in the best way. However, if you stick to ideals, and the ideals are something that's moving you towards a state of expanded consciousness, that's very different. If you don't let yourself be dragged off the path. This is a very interesting thing for those of us who were not necessarily born and raised in a spiritual community, but we have a lot of people in our lives, I know I do, who are not on a spiritual path. And it's remarkable how often I remember I became a vegetarian when I was in my 20s, and vegetarianism was not then what it is now. But I also got into a thing where I would only eat whole grains. It was very challenging to do this. I had to make most of my own bread. I had to make granola, and it just didn't exist. If there was one health food store in a big city, it was a big deal. And I mean, we call a health food store. But my husband and I were just very committed to it, and we stayed on that it wasn't a strict diet to us. We loved it, but I don't think I ate a grain of refined food for over 25 years. Now I do. I was happy to have a cookie tonight, but for a long time I didn't. But people would always say to us, every time we went out, it was so interesting. They would say, oh, come on, treat yourself, have a little chicken tonight, or eat some meat, or come on, you deserve it. Like, what does that mean? You deserve to eat because they love these things. You know, very hard for them to imagine. I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, if I've been traveling with them, or even not traveling, just going out, oh, come on, you can skip meditation one night. You don't have to meditate. Or we want to get up and leave on the hike at 6 in the morning. Can't you just let it go for one day? You know, and you have to be strong in that, because you know you're not going to even do as well during the day, or at least I do, maybe many of us in this room, if I don't meditate. And I say to them, no, you can get up and go earlier if you want, or what time do you want to leave? 6? I'll get up at 4:30. I often say to my friends. But it's funny how much it disturbs people if you're doing things that they're not doing. It's an interesting quality. I don't know what it is. There was a time, so I'd been a vegetarian for a very, very long time. It bothered so many people. My grandmother used to be, sure, you don't eat anything, she would say. And I would say, look at me. Do I look like I don't eat anything? But I didn't eat anything because I would eat around the main course. When I decided, God, it was a lot of years ago now, I don't remember, but at some point I decided that I wanted to add a little fish back into my diet. And it was fascinating what happened. Everybody started saying to me, you can't eat fish. You're not supposed to eat fish. It was just so interesting how fixed people get on, I don't know what that is, you know. You hold qualities for them or something. Very, very interesting, actually. So here I just wrote a note, trying to make people behave as we want them to, in terms of the more contractive side of the first chakra that I was just talking about before, when we're sure that we know what would be good for somebody, and which is really almost never the case unless we're incredibly good listeners and we're taking our cues from them. The second chakra is, of course, represented by water, which means it's that part of us that can be fluid, that can be flexible, that really could, at its best, change direction in a moment's notice and not be thrown off by that. Very hard for a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people really like to know where they're going, and they don't want the plans to change, and that's a second chakra issue. I mean, so I'm talking more about qualities of people now. Connie alluded to some of the physical problems. Water is a very interesting thing because it has a form, but it doesn't hold that form. I could have water in this glass, and it's in one form, and if I took it and poured it out onto the rug, you know, it has a completely different form. Is that funny? So it's still water, but it's able to change its form. Was that funny? I'm sorry. It's just water. You didn't see it? It's just water. Now it's in a different form. But we also know that we can see water in the form of steam, ice. I mean, water, it's not, again, like a piece of granite or stone. So we're starting to see that we're moving, as we move up the chakras, we're moving away from form that has to be in only one form to be real. It's a form that says, wait a minute, maybe the limits and the boundaries aren't what I thought they were. So maybe I could flow a little this way, or I'll flow that way, and it'll really be fine. And gee, we were going to go to this restaurant tonight, but at the last minute somebody says, you know, I don't feel like it, let's go here. And I'm sure you all know people for whom that would be a really serious issue. I have a couple of friends, they just need to know pretty far down the road. You know, one of them, if I travel, you can wake up in the morning and they're already saying, what are we going to be doing tonight? And I feel like, who cares? Can we just be in the moment? But they care. And I've learned really out of respect for those people to try and give them that safety, say, okay, here's the plan. I know full well the plan might change. This is, again, starting to see things not just in physical form, but in spirit. It's the beginning of a transformation. So again, you have to, because we're talking about all this in a physical reality, you have to use your imagination, but you can see. Remember I told you, all this energy as it started vibrating at different levels went from ether to air to fire, and then that fire was so molten that it started to flow and became fluid and liquid, and then reformed, not coalesced, but something like that. I can't think of the right word, till it was solid again. Now we're tracing it back because we want to go back. We'd like to be back in that spiritual reality. This fluidity, this flexibility, creativity has a lot to do with the second chakra. So people who are artists, or people who might have a second chakra that's with a lot of energy flowing through it. And as Connie said, people who are out of balance the other way are just very wishy-washy. They can't hold any form. They might get 3 different college degrees and still not know what they want to do. They have trouble making decisions. Because our second chakra speaks a lot about sexuality, the delusion is that we can satisfy ourselves that way. And if we think of it sexually, so people who really are compelled to have a lot of repeated, constant sexual experiences, thinking that's what's going to make them, I don't want to say happy, because of course sometimes it does make you feel pretty happy, but that's going to be what's going to solve their issues or really bring them. We're talking about a spiritual, changing our level of consciousness. So it's one thing to have an enjoyable moment in the world. It's another thing to get fixated there and to think that's the only place that pleasure comes from. And of course, it's not uncommon. I mean, that's the consciousness of the West. So there's a lot of people who move like that. These are people who are, there's a restlessness. And again, when people are restless, they're looking outside for something to calm them down. You could think of these people as being fickle in a kind of way. I mean, these are all words that used to describe people who have that second chakra. People who can adapt, but they become sort of ungrounded with it. So you put them in a new place or under a new circumstance, and it confuses them. So anyway, second chakra. I'm just running through them. I'd like to get through them all. I think it would feel incomplete if we don't. Third chakra I spoke about a lot already, but it has to do with fire, with real determination, with willpower, with stick-to-itiveness, with people who are able to make decisions and make them quickly. And, it's interesting, and I move very fast like that. I make big decisions, I make them quickly. I think it's all come together. It's not something that comes out of being a doctor. I think it's part of why I could be a doctor. It's very easy for me to take charge and just keep moving things. And my husband constantly, poor guy, I don't know how many times in our life he's had to say, honey, slow down, I can't keep up with you. I mean, it's just not his nature. And when you think of it energetically, and there's nothing I could do to get him, I mean, he moves fast in the world, but in terms of making decisions, going, changing directions, it's so much easier for me to do it. And then every once in a while, I sort of have to stop and say, wait a minute, where's Barry? In a way, it's just really true, because they're very different qualities. And just like I couldn't change that in me, it's not anything that's going to be easily changed in him. And it's interesting to see those things and to try and be respectful of them in people, so you're not railroading them or getting caught again thinking your way is the right way for you, but it may not be for anybody else. This is a chakra that has to do really essentially with personal transformation. I mean, this is where we make this decision, just like Krishna was saying to Arjuna, are you going to move forward, and which way are you going to take your life now? It's a very meaningful moment in our spiritual progress. Are you going to make this decision and allow yourself to be transformed and live your life moving in a spiritual direction? Or are you going to get stuck in basically really in your lower chakras? One of the things that I want to say out loud that's important. There's no such thing as a good or a bad chakra. That doesn't exist. You hear people talk about it all the time. People use these words. So somebody will say, oh, I have good parking karma. You know, like they have any idea what parking means, but they get parking spaces a lot, so they'll use it. But I think they use it like this, too. They'll say, oh, they're just so, not just stuck in a lower chakra, but they use it in a pejorative sense, like having anything to do with our lower chakras is bad. It's absolutely not bad. You cannot be balanced up above. It would be like trying to build a building without having the proper foundation. Every chakra is good as long as it's, again, balanced, like we're talking about. This chakra is about energy. This is where we really bring the energy of, it's fiery. It feels that way. No matter what you have going on in your first and second chakra, if you don't put energy and fire behind it, you're not going to go anywhere. It takes huge willpower to do this. For Arjuna to say, okay, I have to kill this army, and I have to kill this army of these people that I've grown up with, that I love. We played games together, we studied together, we had the same nursing mothers, and now I have to kill them. I mean, it really, and I don't think we ought to underestimate this in our lives. It's not simple to make these choices. It's not simple to say, I'm going to allow myself or put myself in a position to see the world differently than I've ever known it to be. Because that's what we're asking of ourselves here. We're saying what we see is not what we get. Everything has a different meaning than what we thought. I can't prove these things. They're talking to me about Ida, Pingala, Sushumna, little whirlpools of energy, you know, or whatever it is that we're hearing. What does it mean that I could be in two places at one time, or any of the, you know, you could think of the most dramatic forms of being spiritually free. And we have all these people telling us, yes, this happens, yes, this happens. But it's a very hard decision to make. It affects not just us, often everybody in our world. And it takes a lot of willpower and a lot of energy to do it. If we don't do it here, if we don't say, okay, I'm grounded, I'm feeling pretty flexible, I'm letting energy flow through me now, I'm going to do this and make the decision and stick to it, we'll just stand still at best or move backwards. Swamiji says, on the spiritual path, there's no such thing as standing still. If you're not moving forward, you're moving back. And probably, I know I've had that experience. You really have to bring a lot of willpower to it. This is where it becomes very clear, and I'm saying it in many ways, life, as we know it, really is a day-to-day battle. It's the truth between subconsciousness and superconsciousness. That's what it is. It's this ongoing battle. Gee, am I going to get lazy and watch movies every night? I really love watching movies. Or am I going to do something that might be more uplifting? And again, I'm not casting any aspersion on watching a movie every once in a while. That's not the point. But it's moving towards that tamasic, lazy. But it can just happen in so many ways. So it's a battle. And I think it's a particularly difficult chakra because it has to do with power. And for many people on the spiritual path, they don't like the notion of power. There's a tremendous misunderstanding on the spiritual path of being really sweet and easy and going along with anything, and that's spiritual. Being quiet, never expressing anything. And it's not at all spiritual. It might be great spiritual energy in the right circumstance, but it's not always. Power is the hardest divine attribute for people to begin to own. The hardest one for people to make sense of on the spiritual path. It's just not how anybody conceived of the path, that you really have to be a warrior. And you do. Doesn't mean you're out there fighting with people. You have to be a warrior in your spine. That's where this battle is being fought. Okay, the other side of this chakra is people who become fanatical, people who become really ruthless. I mean, Hitler is always the example that's used. So it's all of this fire and determination, but it's turned in a really negative, overly aggressive is really the way to put it. Any comments or questions? No? Okay. The fourth chakra. Yes, yeah.
In struggling with that third chakra, even thinking about it, I'm overcome with exhaustion. The energy just kind of, the thought of dealing with it in the way that you've been speaking. I understand perfectly what you're saying. And it can bring, at least in my case, I think it can bring on an incredible loss of stamina.
Well, let me just say this. Let me answer that in a generic sense, although it's complicated because you're telling me something about yourself. But that says a lot to you. I mean, if we weren't here and we really wanted to talk about that, we would understand so much about you that would be very meaningful. I mean, when we talk about self-honesty. So to ask that question, why is it that when somebody thinks about raising their energy, grabbing hold of their energy, it just gets exhausting? I mean, it's not surprising to me in a way, but it's just like saying, it would be like coming in to see me in my medical office and saying to me, I have a horrible cough and a fever, and I'm coughing up green sputum. I mean, there's a diagnosis that can be made, almost. Now, I'm not going to diagnose you here, don't worry. But I mean, it says something, and it's not good or bad. There's no judgment in it. It's incredibly honest of you to say that, but it really does talk about it's perfect that you say it, really, because we're talking about what happens when energy gets blocked. It is exhausting. We talk about this energy being blocked. Yogananda called it thwarting cross currents of ego, because when energy's flowing up this way, that's wonderful. It's uplifting. It gives us energy. When it's not, when it's being held down, it basically goes out and it dissipates, and it's energy. So you're losing energy. So it's a very meaningful thing that you said that. Let me just leave it there, and something that I think would be wonderful. You see that, you know that. It's like, wow, you really have some stuff to work with. Good for you. Yeah, right. Yoo-hoo. Well, that's what I said. Remember when I said before that there's no such thing as good or bad? Yogananda said, and you will live this many times in your life if you look at it, every situation in life is neutral. The only thing that changes is what we do with it. And his disciple, Sister Gyanamata, who many of us know, she says so beautifully, she said, I always pray, God, don't change my circumstance, change my consciousness. So I'm not trying to be light or glib with you. I'm saying there's nothing good or bad or right or wrong about what you said. What's going to matter is what you do with it. So, and that's what I'm talking about. It's not easy. I mean, you're saying exactly what I said. It is not easy. It takes a lot of energy and willpower and willingness and commitment to keep growing spiritually. The tendency, that's the devil, is to just hold us back. When we move into the fourth chakra, which is the element is air, this is really where this separation comes in from the lower three chakras, all of which had to do with earth elements, earth, water, fire. And now we're formless. I mean, in a way, we can contain air, but if we don't try and contain it, it will just expand to fill up whatever space it's given. So we are really, this is a big jump into our spiritual reality. And somebody was asking, Mirella, I think you did, about intuition and the heart. The big thing here with the heart chakra and the heart energy is, are we talking about likes and dislikes, as Connie said, which are poison to the spiritual aspirant? Because every like and dislike that we have, and of course we all have them, sets us up to have a need in this material reality. And when the need's not met, it sets us up for constant disappointment. And we have so many likes and dislikes. I wish I had Master's statement here because I quote, it's so perfect you can't paraphrase him. You inevitably lose a lot. But he said human beings are basically just ingenious in thinking of ways to live in delusion. I mean, there's an unending number of ways, and that's the way it is with our likes and dislikes. We're talking about the difference between devotion and emotion. We're talking about the difference between detachment and, what's the word? Dispassion in a way that's like uninvolvement at all. But what we're talking about in the heart is how can we be very involved, keep our heart open, know love, see God in everyone and everything, so that all we see in the world is love. But it is love that we take, so we have an intuition, but we don't know it to be true. True love, true intuition, until we take that energy consciously and thoughtfully, and we move it from our heart up to the point between the eyebrows, where we know the truth then. So intuition does come to us in our heart when our hearts are more pure. You know, if we're emotional, we can't know the truth. There's that wonderful, wonderful story in the autobiography of a yogi where, I'm so sorry that I don't have these quotes exactly, but Sri Yukteswar had had an experience where he saw Babaji. And he got so emotional about it. He was saying, I've got to go and get you a treat. I've got to get you something. And Babaji was saying, Lahiri, I don't need anything. I don't want anything. I want you to sit and be with me. He really was like, we're not going to be together that long. Stay here. But Lahiri couldn't. And he said, no, you just have to wait. I can't believe. He was like that, like, I can't believe it's you. I mean, it was Babaji, after all, who was there. And he ran home, and when he came back, Babaji was gone. And sometime later, he was with his guru, who was Lahiri Mahashaya. So this is Sri Yukteswar, who met Babaji. Now he's sitting with Lahiri, and Babaji walks into the room. And Sri Yukteswar's mad at him. So he shuns Babaji. And, Lahiri looks at him and says, you're turning your back on Babaji? And Babaji looked, very calmly, and he says, you're angry with me, aren't you? And Sri Yukta said, of course I'm angry, you disappeared. And, Babaji basically says to him, I was fairly extinguished from the ether by your emotions, meaning a subtle form of energy, the truth, intuition, pure love, cannot exist in the face of all of that emotion. When we're very emotional, and emotional generally means we need something. So most of the way that we love as human beings is with a need attached to the other person. It can be quiet or a subtle need, but we want something from them. That's usually what's going on. Or we're sure they're going to make us feel complete, whole, more uplifted, Oh, I'm getting married, this will solve all my problems. Right? There's a misunderstanding of what happens in most marriages. But I mean, it's like that. That's what human love, the human heart, can be injured so easily, can be hurt so easily. However, when it's divine love, when it's devotion, and this is so important because Sri Yukteswar, who's a Jnana Yogi, means he teaches mostly through book teaching, intellectual understanding. He made the comment, you cannot put one foot in front of the other on the spiritual path until you've developed devotion. But true devotion, not that emotional that fairly extinguishes the gurus from the ether. That was such an incredible statement that he made. So this is very tricky because we're saying be impersonal with people in a kind of way, but not cold. I remember when Swami made the statement, that I don't know if he said any true yogi, but he said disciples, any disciple, he was talking about the village, should be able to live with any other disciple without a problem. In other words, Doesn't matter who you think you're in love with. And really, when you think of arranged Indian marriages, it's pretty much that. You don't meet the person, you're just there, and it's like, okay, look, your stars work, we read it all, this is for you, marry this person. And their marriages certainly work at least as well as ours do here, if not better. And it's really the truth. I heard this thing about 6 months ago on the news. In England, the divorce rate was so high that they were starting to have these, what do you call them? Where you go to a store, you're getting married, and you make a list of the things you want. What are they called, those lists? Registry. They were having divorce registries. Isn't that amazing? This is in England. This was in London, but it was happening. I mean, so what's happened? This is what happens when it's human love, emotional love. And we're not just, it's not just love. It's not at all that human love. It's pure love of the heart, which means seeing God in everyone. It means a rather impersonal nature, even with your partner. Because really, it's only when you're living in that way that you're going to be able to find complete peace in that relationship. Otherwise, you're always needing something from people. You're always going to need them to be a little different than who they are. You're always going to need them to be a little more like you. You're always shocked when they're not, or that they're not living to just anticipate and satisfy your needs. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but if you really think about it, not by much. This is what happens in most of our relationships. It happens even with parents and children and brothers and sisters and even a lot of friendships, because it's lacking that impersonal quality of trying to take the feeling here and keep it up here. And the closer we get to that, the more we get to that, the more easily we can love everybody. I'm not going to take time to tell this story, but many of you have heard me tell the story of when I had the spiritual epiphany that my husband, who I'm with, who's still my husband, that as long as we were both in a human body, I was going to be with him. I think I might have even told it here, but maybe not. It doesn't matter. It's a wonderful story. But what came to me with that, and this was not, I didn't figure this out. This was inspired. This was total grace from God. You will only and always see God in him. You will never, from this moment on, see anything wrong with him again. Wrong with him. When you look into his eyes, you will see Divine Mother looking back at you. Now, that is the truth. It's not like I had to make up some fantasy. I could say it about anybody in this room. If I look at you, and that was the spiritual epiphany. It became a gift to me, whether I've succeeded 100% with my husband or not, which I have not, but close and way better than if I hadn't had that epiphany. But I've learned it always with other people now. This is God looking right at you. You're making a meal for God right now. You're opening the door. The next client who walks in, everybody who comes to your class, see everybody as God. It becomes such an extraordinary love and so impersonal. And you don't need anything from anybody because they're already all of it. You can't get it wrong. If you see everybody as being divine, they're perfect just as they are. And it's not silly. I promise you, if you put it into practice in any way, you start having more and more of the experience. You move from being intolerant to tolerant, from being judgmental to loving, not just accepting, but of seeing perfection in front of you. And does it happen overnight? Well, it didn't for me. But am I doing it better than I was doing it before that epiphany? Absolutely. Remember, we said any step in the right direction is great spiritual progress. So you just start a little habit like that. You don't see people as people. You bring it up here. You move the energy up. And here's another thing. When you do that and you sit with it, you get the next affirmation of an intuition. You know then for sure if it's loud and strong. Everything has to be held in this light, ultimately, to know if it's true. And it's unbelievably freeing to be able to love everybody just as they are. It's the most freeing thing in the world. I feel it, even when I'm on a Saturday, if I'm spending a Saturday, because the people the closest to us, it's the hardest. They're our greatest teachers. They really are. Very easy for me to love every patient. I've probably really genuinely loved 98% of my patients. Genuinely. It's really easy. They have nothing to do with my life. I'm there to serve them. It's simple. It gets harder and harder and harder. And then I get to my brother. That's really hard. Then I get to a dear friend who's been a friend my whole life. That's really hard. Then I get to my husband. Hardest. That's what it means when they said they can ring your bell. Not a good bell to have rung, But it's true. We've let them in. We're drawn to them for some reason. So when I can just hold my husband there, even on days where he might be feeling a little scritchy himself or out of sorts, or maybe he'd like to try and start a fight. Maybe I'd like to try and start a fight, but I don't. Or I see that he's just leaning into a little fight, and you go, no, I'm not going to budge. I'm here with God. I'm going to treat you just like God. I love you, just exactly as you are. What can I do, honey, to make your day better? How can I be with you today? What would you like from me? And my God, you just feel like this instead of, why are you doing this to me? And you just feel so contracted, So, now, the danger is that you go right to this impersonal nature with somebody, which is what people do on the spiritual path. They become completely detached, thinking that's spiritual. That's not spiritual. What's spiritual is to be able to feel that every human being that you're with, that you're in love with. People talking about individually making love to God. How else do we do it? We do it in everybody, and I don't mean on the physical plane. I mean making love in our hearts and holding it up. Okay, I'm just going to move so that we can get out of here. Let me just cover the 5th chakra, and then we'll just stop because, we've already said we'll all come back. We'll do this for 8 weeks. We'll do it a few more times in this life together. I just wrote this note, which Swami must have said, always offering inner qualities up to the quality above it. And that's what came up to me when you asked that question, Morella, is that yes, you get it in the heart, but you offer it up. Firmness, intuition, real zeal to advance, and the willpower to move in spirit, upward affirmation of the heart. I wrote those, that must have been his words, so I'm just sharing them now. This 5th chakra, the throat chakra, is, the element is ether. So, if you think of ether, you can see we are really now way beyond any physical form. We've come a long way on this spiritual journey. And it really does have to do with our ability to express ourselves, to find our voice. But remember, it's not just in the world, although we do need to do these things in the world, but it means, again, spiritually. The quality that goes with it is calmness. And Swamiji talks about calmness. It is, by the way, one of the 8 attributes that we'll talk about. But he says peace, which is also one of the 8 attributes, is a much earlier attribute that people get to because it's sort of the absence of agitation, whereas calmness has a certain energy to it. You have to bring energy. That's when Master said, be calmly active and actively calm. It's like bringing energy in to be calm. It's a kind of calm dispassion. It's Connie said before, and it's true, as you move further up these chakras, they get harder and harder to put words to because they're beyond words. It is really what starts happening. When we used to do a class for each chakra, we'd look at each other, and when we get to the 6th and 7th, like, you're kidding, we have to talk about this for 2 hours? You can't say anything. Better we should all just sit and meditate together. It's really, in a way. But not so much with the 5th chakra, because this is an obvious, in terms of the chakras, expansion of consciousness. Because now it is really completely formless. And Connie mentioned, so I don't need to go through this, the side of it when it's out of balance. is a real restlessness. It's having that quality that we call mercurial, which means that we're constantly changing depending on the environment that we're in. So we're not being calmness. This isn't attaining a state of feeling calm. This is literally being calmness. So let me just stop there. I think this is a good place for us to end. Questions or comments before we go? Anybody?
Sorry.
No, this is good.
Good question, and then we just forget about it. One thing I have a little bit puzzled, which puzzles me. So the second chakra stands also for creativity. Clear, I understand that. On the heart level, when we create something or we would like to create something, that also comes sometimes through the heart.
Yes, absolutely.
So we have both.
Yes, we do. And that's why I said this is not linear. You could not be a in the world, responsible, heartfelt, creative person and make it work if your second chakra is too out of balance. I'll just use that word. Where it's like building blocks, but they're not linear. So yes, just like I'm saying, you can have, intuition can come in the heart, but you want to bring it up here. Creativity can come, it feels like it's coming because intuition does through the heart. It's not, the chakras are not, only creativity is shut in that second chakra. It's not like that. They don't have boundaries and walls and limits. There's a tremendous interplay of this energy. So I think this is very hard.
Different part of creativity, because the second chakra, isn't it the creativity which comes out of the second chakra, is the transmutation of the sexual energy into creativity?
I don't,
And I just wonder if this
yeah.
is
I don't think it's only taking sexual energy and turning it into creativity because, you're thinking that there's a certain energy that's only sexual. I mean, energy's energy. So I think it's creativity in a much broader sense because we're not stuck in a form. So it's the creative energy that can flow when you allow energy to flow. And the sexual energy, certainly we know of people transforming sexual energy. There are athletes who make sure that they have no sexual encounters of any kind for weeks before an event because they want to take that energy and use it. It's actually very wise. And I've heard many people talk about stories like that. But it's not only sexual energy that becomes creative. So I think creative energy is creative energy. When it comes through the heart, it might look a certain way. It might have a certain more devotional quality to it. I don't even know for sure that it would have to. But I think the mistake that we can make is to think that these are separate entities acting separately. They're not. And nothing about it is really linear. That's all. That's the only way I know how to say it. It's not here, 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 here. And even our pictures look that way, although you saw that picture of the meditating yogi and all that. It was just filled with energy going in all directions at all times, the picture that Connie showed us. So, yeah, I think these things are also very hard for the human mind to grasp. And I don't want to speak like I got it, but I think just from hearing it so many times, I don't think it's second chakra creativity is because we've transformed sexual energy. It's because we've transformed energy from solid stuck to allowing it to flow a little. That's how I would say it to you.